Welcome to Monsters in My Mind. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the stories. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. And as always, thank you for watching. Now, let the chills begin. Call Me Jack. Written and narrated by Robert Behrman. Scene 1. No! You monster. Please let me go. I won't tell anyone. If you just let me go, I'll disappear. I'll move to Mexico. Anything you want. Just please stop. The pain seared her brain as the scalpel pierced through the formerly created scar tissue. With no anesthesia, it was all she could do to block the horrors of the events occurring to her. Oh, Susanna, oh, don't you cry for me. Ha, ha, ha. No more. No. Mine eyes have seen the glory. The coming of... Fear and anguish were palpable. It coursed over his lips and into his mouth. He could taste her exquisite torture. It was sweet, and the adrenaline rush added a hint of bitter to the delectable bouquet. The old man licked his lips to savor every morsel he inflicted upon his subject. That is how he thought of them. They were not human. They were test subjects, just animals for his experiments, enjoyment, and most of all, revenge. It feels like something is missing, he said to himself. What was I thinking? I didn't turn on the phonograph. I cannot fully enjoy this without some music. He hobbled over to the record player, cranked the handle, and then placed needle to wax. Ah, what a marvelous invention. I still can't get over it. He stopped and pointed to the young woman strapped to the table. It just baffles my mind how they can record this miles away, and it's as if they were having a concert right here in my house. His eyes lifted as he lost himself in thought. Of course, it's not the Royal Albert Hall. Ah, the acoustics in that hall, the grandeur, almost surreal. It's a pity I had to leave England, but my work must continue. He snapped back to reality, and his eyes burned with passion. Ah, yes, my work. Now where was I? Picking the scalpel up, he returned to the table. The subject had beads of sweat falling off of her face. He plunged the razor-sharp edge back into her stomach and continued his morbid cutting. Her screams were lost to any ear of compassion as her vision faded to black. Scene 2. The bright sunlight dazzled his eyes as he stepped out from the trees into the field. A bluebird glided effortlessly through the air. The cool breeze of autumn offered refreshing respite from the burning sun that had yet to relinquish its summer's heat. "Inspector Brown! This way, please!" the deputy called out. Brown looked around and with a sigh hurried over to the crime scene. The gruesome scene before him lay in stark contrast to the serene surroundings. A young woman lay lifeless and mutilated in a field of golden wheat on a farmer's property. I'm telling you, this is exactly how I found her. I came out to inspect the crops after that storm we had a few days ago. I wanted to make sure no damage had happened and that harvest would go smoothly. That's when I saw a gap in the heads of the grain. I thought it might be a deer, and I was just going to shoo it away so it didn't eat my wheat, the old farmer said between puffs of his pipe. And that's when I came upon this unholy sight. Poor girl. The farmer moved his right hand in the shape of a cross over his body before continuing. It ain't right to be done like she'd been done. I've gutted a few deers in my day, but I've never seen anyone or anything ripped open like that before. You think it might have been a wolf or a wookalar? Maybe some other kind of large animal? Don't be superstitious. There are no such things as wookalars. Besides, they only eat your brains, Brown said as he leaned down over the body. He noticed by the scar tissue on her that this was not the first time she had been cut up. The incisions were clean, even if the carcass was a mess. Her throat was slit from ear to ear. Her abdomen lay wide open. It occurred to the inspector, even with his limited knowledge of anatomy, that many pieces were missing. The inspector opened her mouth, and just like the last two, there was a small piece of paper folded neatly and placed under her tongue. He gently unfolded the paper, and scrawled upon it in red ink were the words, "Dear Boss, back at work." It was signed simply with one name, Jack. Oh, it's just like the other two. I can see why the chief called me directly. He rose up and looked at the team that huddled around him. "We are dealing with a serial killer, gentlemen," he announced. "I want this area combed over for any clues. Look for footprints in and out. Check all your feet so we know your treads. Take pictures of the body before you move her, then have her taken to the coroners for further investigations. I want to know who she is, where she worked, and if she has any family." The men hurried off to begin their tasks. Constable Stone came alongside the inspector. "I don't think it's a good idea to just declare a serial killer like that. I know you've solved a good many cases, but how can you be so sure without further proof?" The inspector produced a small black book from his left breast pocket and a pencil from his right. He took a few steps back, opened his book, and began to sketch. "The scar tissue. It's just like the last two. Not many people take the time to allow their victims to heal. No. This person is torturing them before death. Each one has had their body sliced open with precision. These are clues enough to make me sure that it is the same criminal doing this." "I still think you're being rather hasty. Just because you've seen your name in the paper doesn't mean you know everything," the constable muttered as he plodded off to continue his work. "Excuse me, Inspector. We need to set up for the photo," said a man carrying a large wooden tripod. Behind him was the man with the camera. "In a minute. I just need to jot down a few details." "Fairly morbid of you, if I may say so, to be drawing a picture of her like this," the cameraman said, peering over the inspector's shoulder. "It's so I don't forget." "Forget?" "So I don't forget the look on her face, the terror still on her from such a gruesome act. I keep it to remind me that she was a person, and that it's not just a case. It gives me a sense of urgency to catch the killer. When I catch the criminal, and I certainly will, I burn the sketch so that she may finally rest at peace, and so I can release it from my memory." He quickly finished his drawing and closed the book. The picture faded to black. Scene 3. A few days later, there was a knock on the door. "Eliza? Eliza! Answer the door!" The knocking continued and grew more incessant. "Damn it, Eliza! If you don't answer that door—" The old man stopped mid-sentence. "That's right. You're indisposed at the moment. I'll have to answer it myself." He grabbed his cane and rose to his feet, and then began to hobble down the long stairwell, through the parlor and sitting room, until he reached the antechamber. The large oak door was formidable and well decorated with pictures of flowers and angels scrolled into the wood. At his age, opening the beastly door was strenuous, and he had to brace himself to move the weight. "Good day. I'm Inspector Brown," the man said as soon as the door was opened. "And I'm Victoria. The agency sent me. They told me you needed another housekeeper." "I see. I am Dr. Winters, as you both may already know. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintances." The doctor gave a deep nod to Victoria, and then offered Inspector Brown his hand to shake. He ushered them inside, and Inspector Brown shut the door behind them. "If you'll give me just 1 minute, Inspector," I want to show Miss Victoria around first, if you don't mind." "By all means, Doctor. I'm in no hurry." Winters and Victoria walked off, and the inspector was left in the antechamber. Brown looked around and was immediately taken by the majesty of the old house. It was by far out of the reach of what he made as a policeman. There were multiple rooms branching off from the main entrance. He took his time to do what he was paid to do: inspect. Opening the first door he came to, he was greeted by the sight of a large, well-stocked study. Books lined the walls, and directly in the middle, at the back, there was a large leather chair sitting in front of a well-used fireplace. Examining the books, he noticed many on the subject of anatomy, medical research, and biology. A bit further down, he noticed that many of the titles turned to darker subjects. One that caught his attention was titled "Medieval Implements of the 14th Century and Their Uses." Another that found his eye was titled "Monas Hieroglyphica." Many of the authors on the shelves Brown had never heard of before. A few names jumped out at him: Plato, Nietzsche, Machiavelli, Freud, and Marx were ones that all made their way to his observation. "Ah, you have permissed yourself to browse my belongings, I see," Winters said as he entered the room. "Anything catch your fancy? I will loan you a book if you like, as long as you bring it back." "Oh no, I was just browsing," Brown said as he picked up a copy of Beyond Good and Evil. "This is a splendid house you have here." "Thank you. I've worked hard my whole life so I could enjoy my golden years in peace. Now, what brings an inspector to my domain of solace?" Winters asked, slightly bemused. "I'm sure it's no significant consequence, but there have been reports of some of your housekeepers disappearing. Maybe, perhaps, just coincidental. Yet, due diligence obliges the police to come and inquire of you. You understand, I'm sure." "Oh, I do understand," Dr. Winters replied as he limped further into the room. "I understand that this agency that I keep requesting help from sends me nothing but naive, sickly, and lazy. May I file a report against them for bamboozling an old man? It's probably ran by a bunch of suffragettes who just want to sit in a salon and get permanent waves all day instead of taking up arms for the cause." "Doctor, I'm not sure what you're trying to get at." Brown looked at him quizzically. "My first housekeeper couldn't tell a spoon from a spatula. I ran her out of here, and she's probably still running to this day. She should be, at least. She had no right to think she could be employed with her pea brain. The second one was always sniffling, coughing, and sneezing. I don't know how many times she came here in the morning and went straight to the toilet to expel last night's drink. Have you checked the local mortuary to see if she has passed on yet? The last one was a real disappointment. She was beautiful. Smart, too. Biggest problem is that she sat around all day talking about going to faraway places. Last I heard, she wanted to sit on a sunny beach down in Mexico. Maybe she's there by now." Winters was visibly angry. White knuckles clutched the silver head of his cane. "We can get to all that in a moment. It sounds as if you've had problems with the help here." "Problems? Problems? I've had problems, all right. It's robbery to charge an old man $15 a month for incompetent workers." Brown was jotting down notes in his notebook, and then started again. "Just for some background information. You immigrated here in 1890 from London, England, correct?" "Yes, 1890, from London, England, that is correct. While there, you worked as a doctor, and upon landing here, you took work at Cornell University as a professor in their pre-med program." "Correct. I taught anatomy and human biology. You retired about 3 years ago at the age of 60. You live on your own. Anyone else live in the house with you?" "No. No one else lives here. I'm alone, and I prefer it that way." "I see. Do you mind if I look around for a while? Maybe one of the housekeepers left something behind." I'm sure in this large estate there might be a few things that have escaped your scrutiny. Be my guest. I must now excuse myself to make sure my new keeper is doing her job." With that, Dr. Winters left Inspector Brown to examine the rest of the house. The inspector walked through the dining room with its long wooden table. Fine china was placed neatly in the chifforobe, and spoke of the opulence that could be obtained by a well-respected doctor of the day. Past the dining room, he entered the kitchen. Hams hung on hooks alongside pots and pans. Root vegetables were soaking in the sink. It appeared as if the new worker had already begun meal preparations. The inspector took the servants' stairs up to the second floor and found himself in a long hallway. He counted 6 bedrooms and another upstairs study. Why an elderly man who lived alone needed so many bedrooms was beyond him. It could have just been another way to flaunt his wealth. He continued through and back down the main stairwell into a tea room. Peacock feathers adorned the wall, but other than that, there was nothing of note. Finally, he came to a door just opposite the study that he had started in. The door was locked. He heard voices from the parlor and went to inquire if he could get the door opened. "You imbecile!" he heard Winters declare. "Your first day on the job, and you burnt the ironing. I ought to tie you up by your toenails and watch the blood drain. Lord knows you're not using it to supply your brain with oxygen." "Dr. Winters!" Brown interjected. "That is no way to talk to a lady." Winters shuffled around. There was a clear look of hurt in his eyes. You're right. Forgive me. I'm just a tired old man waiting out his days. I may need to go upstairs and take a rest. This is the most company I've had in a while, and it seems to have gotten to me." He began to walk away. Dr. Winters had not gone far when Inspector Brown said, "Before I go, I would like to see what is inside that locked room, if you don't mind." "You may not," replied the doctor. "That room houses my last great experiments. Any disruption to them may cause them to fail." "I must insist," Brown replied. "You are a person of interest, and it would go far in clearing your name." "You will need a warrant then. Good day, Inspector. See yourself out. I must be going." With that, the doctor continued on to the stairs and slowly ascended them. Inspector Brown tried for days to obtain a warrant. Dr. Winters, it appeared, had a good number of friends in high offices and was more than casual with gifts of money. Every time his name was brought up in conjunction to the cases of 3 missing women, doors slammed shut. All the other possible leads on various suspects dried up. Either there were solid alibis or found to be false reports. This left Brown with only one direction to go. It became apparent that the good doctor was the only avenue left to investigate. Brown called on the doctor at exactly 7 o'clock that evening. Winters opened the door. "Good evening, Inspector Brown. For what purpose do you call on me tonight? It is late to be conducting investigations, don't you think?" "I just came by to see if that offer to borrow a book still stands," inquired Brown. "Of course. Knowledge is always available to those that seek it." Winters motioned the inspector in. It was apparent to Brown's keen eye that there had not been any cleaning done in the last few weeks. There was dirt streaks on the marble floor, and the beginning of cobwebs in some of the corners. "Did Miss Victoria not work out for you?" "Who? Oh, right, Victoria," Winters said as he headed towards the library. "I had to let her go. She just couldn't cut it." Brown found it odd that he exaggerated the word cut. They arrived at the study. It was just as it had been the first time Brown was there. There were no signs anywhere in the house of foul play or struggle. The inspector went straight for the book that had caught his attention last time, Beyond Good and Evil. He noticed the author's name, Nietzsche. "I would like to borrow this one, if that's fine with you." "Please do. That is one of my favorites. It really opened my eyes to the working of this life. the doctor said as he took a seat in his leather chair. The room was lit only by a fire in the center of the room. Opened on the table next to the chair was a copy of the Communist Manifesto. Brown walked towards the book and casually browsed the open pages. What's this one about? That one? That one is how society is going to be in a few years' time. If the ideas in that book catch on, there will be a heaven on earth. No more injustice, no more suffering. Every man working together for the betterment of his brother. Sounds fantastical, doesn't it? You know what they say, if something sounds too good to be true, it usually is, Brown said. Bah, I see. You are one of the naysayers as well. Why can't it be true? I mean, I see the flaws in their outline. Obviously, there will still have to be some class structure. Most people are too incompetent to run their own lives. But if the wise ones run the government, and then the others could be classless. Are you saying that a benevolent government should run the lives of its people, and by that then all people will be equal? More or less, Inspector. You've seen the horrors of the common man, the drunkards and filthy prostitutes out there that sell their dignity for a crumb. Now, imagine a world where they were free from their vices, their hardships, their sufferings. They cannot bring this freedom to themselves. They need men of great intellect to guide them, men such as myself, or maybe even possibly you, Winters said with a sly smile. How could these great men of intellect guide the rest? Brown continued his questioning. He thought that if he could get into this old man's mind, he might better be able to understand him. There possibly could even be clues to if he was indeed the murderer. Winter stoked the fire and gazed into the burning flame. When I was younger, my father, well, let's just say he was not a nice man. He worked hard, he was dutiful, but the long hours he worked to make another man rich took a certain toll on him. He would drink in an attempt to forget his lot in life. To this day, I still have the scars. Winter's hand gripped the silver head of his cane tightly. My mother consumed laudanum to dull the ache this world gives you when you lack the know-how to fight back. Winters looked at Brown, his eyes visibly welling up from the painful recollection. I don't tell you this for any sort of pity. It is to let you know that I have been at the bottom. I know what causes pain and suffering, the doctor continued. This is how we will stop the suffering. Outlaw all vices, then remove the pitiless toil for money. Work will be done by all, the needs of all met by the government. If you need bread, the government will give you bread. If you need clothes, those will be provided as well. All work and all receive. No money for men to get rich. No greed or theft or jealousy or envy. All are equal. All are equal, except for those in charge, of course, Brown interjected. He was now standing opposite of Winters by the fireplace. Oh, well, some are more equal than others. There has to be leaders. But they are not above their fellow man. They just have a different job. It's really a combination of two schools of thought. The book that I am reading and the one that you have borrowed. I have just meshed them together into a sort of working outline. It sounds sinister to me. People in positions that decide what is necessary for others. Only the person themselves can decide that. Brown slid his hand into his pockets. A man should be able to pursue what he likes, not be put into a job that at the order of some dictator. Money drives competition. Competition drives inquiry. Inquiry gives way to innovation, and that is what betters the lives of people. Why, look at electricity. I know it is not feasible yet, but offer enough money, and soon people will find ways to put it into every house in the nation. Bah! What about the man who works hard trying to find the solution, only to be beat out by another? One gets all the money and fame, and the other is lost to obscurity. No, that leads to suffering. No competition, only collaboration. The doctor shuffled over to his chair and sat. You do not understand, yet, that there is the obligation of some to lead others. Do not infect me with your slave morality. Read that book you have borrowed, and you will understand. You call it sinister. There is no such thing. Good, evil, they're all just figments of your imagination. What may hurt one person may save 1,000 lives. Is it then wrong? He asked as he pulled a blanket over himself. I must admit, I am not as well armed as you are for a battle of wits and moral theory. I don't usually delve into the theoretical side. I am usually in the applied portion of this conversation. Say, for instance, when a person cuts up innocent girls for pleasure, that is clearly an act of evil. For pleasure, yes. Now, if that person had done it to advance scientific learning, then maybe it could be justified. Now, if you'll excuse me, it is getting late, Winter said as he pointed to the grandfather clock on the left side of the fireplace. It had just struck 9:30. Brown took his book and made his way to the door through the now dark hallway. He opened it and walked out into the night. He shut the door behind him, and the hallway faded to black. Scene 4. Inspector Brown! He heard a high-pitched voice squeal. Turning around, he was surprised to see the face of Victoria. She was wearing a long black evening dress that had lace around the sleeves and a large hat with feathers protruding from it. Much too expensive to be had on a housekeeper's earnings. It had been a few weeks, but he was sure that was her. Victoria, correct? He asked, pointing to her. I'm surprised you remember me, she said. I'm surprised you remember me as well. It's not every day you get to meet the inspector that you read about in the paper. Of course I remember you. I went by Dr. Winter's house just a moment ago. It appeared as though you no longer work there. I had to quit. He was so mean, and nothing I did was ever good enough. Also, I just got engaged. I'm going to be Mrs. Witherspoon. She squealed again as she thrust her left hand into his face. There on her ring finger was a silver band with a large diamond on top. Congratulations! I'm happy for you. Darling, we must get going. An older gentleman called from behind while resting on his cane. He was wearing a tuxedo with tails and was clearly a man who was well off. That was unusual for this part of New York. Most gentlemen of leisure lived in New York City, not out by the university. That's him. That's my Jack. She turned to leave. It was nice seeing you again. With that, she left with her fiancé and faded into the blackness of the night. Brown waved her goodbye and begun to feel slightly dumbstruck. He was relieved that she had not become a victim of the doctor's. But was it for certain that the doctor was the murderer? Perhaps someone unknown to him was attempting to frame the doctor. All these thoughts muddled in his mind as he walked back to his home. It was a modest house, far less grand than the one that Dr. Winters resided at, yet it filled his needs perfectly. He walked through the small stone fence, up through the yard, and opened the plain wooden door. The gaslight was set low. Turning the knob on the lamp, the flames jumped alive and illuminated the entryway. He slipped off his shoes and plodded to his small living room table. The wooden chair creaked as he sat down and began to read the book that he had borrowed from the doctor. Opening the book, he noticed on the inside of the cover a triangle with an eye in it that had rays of light shining from it. Underneath was the inscription, "To my dear apprentice, may knowledge light your path." It was signed by L. Rothschild. To a man who made his living in absolute truth, the words of the book confused him. He knew what right and wrong were. He made decisions daily and put people to justice based on these ideals. Yet, there was a certain logic behind the arguments he was reading. Then an idea struck him. If a man were able to see truth in his actions subjectively, with no absolute grounding in thought, he would be able to justify any action he committed. Brown was now less sure that Winters was in fact guilty of the murders, but he was more sure that if he had murdered, he would by no means feel guilt. It was a fact, however, that the capacity to kill was not a crime. Only the act of murder was punishable. Brown still needed more evidence. He continued to read well past midnight. His eyes were becoming heavy and his thoughts sluggish. He retired to his room, turned down the gaslight, and lay in his bed. With his head swimming in ideas, his eyelids closed, and everything faded to black. Scene 5. In the morning, the inspector woke to the gentle sunlight streaming through his window, and a pounding on the door. He got up, put on his robe, and made his way to see what was so urgent. On the other side of the door stood Constable Stone. This was an odd thing to see on a Saturday morning. "What is it, Constable?" asked Brown as he stretched. "There have been 2 more, not even a short distance from each other. You must come, immediately." Brown rushed to get dressed. He put on his suit coat and grabbed his bowler's hat. They made their way quickly to just a few blocks north of the Lyceum Theater. In an alleyway, underneath a set of stairs, lay the lifeless body of a young woman. She was dressed in a long black evening gown. It had lace on the cuff, and next to her was a large hat that had flowers on the brim. Her face was so badly mutilated that a positive identification would be near impossible. Brown recalled having seen a dress similar to that the night before. Just like before, the throat was slit and the abdomen cut wide open. Constable Stone then led the way up the street 2 alleyways away. There, lying in a small room off of the street, heaped on the ground, was a woman who appeared to be a prostitute. Her clothes were shabby and torn, throat slit, belly open, but on her forehead was carved the words, "From Hell." "Constable, in this town there is a man, Mr. Witherspoon. Go collect him immediately. I'm afraid he might flee. He is now a suspect in these murders," the inspector barked. "Okay, where should I look?" asked the constable. "Check the inns, or he may be staying at a young lady's house. Miss Victoria. I don't know her last name. I only know that she works for the maid services here in town." "Right. On my way, Inspector." Brown pulled out his notebook and began to sketch. 2 hours later, they were at the police station. Jack Witherspoon sat in a small room and adjusted his tie. "For the last time, she is going ahead of me to New York. I've known her since she was a child. Her parents are family friends, and she, most importantly, is not in any harm." Brown laid the flat of his palm on his forehead and was lost in contemplation. The clues and style of killing all seemed vaguely familiar to him. He had heard of this before, but it had happened far away. "Jack, you know it is hard to believe you. You have no proof of any sort that she has left. No ticket, no itinerary. She won't be able to write for at least 2 days." "Inspector, she took my private carriage back. I will be taking the train. I felt it would be more comfortable for her that way. She doesn't like to be around a lot of people." "You have to let him go. You know where he lives. If anything comes up, you can find him. Without evidence, you have no right to detain him further," a young man with slick back hair stated. "It would be wise to listen to my lawyer. I have enough money to cause trouble, if you insist on detaining me," Jack said with a hint of a smile. "Was that a threat?" Inspector Brown asked. "No, just stating a fact," Jack wistfully said as he polished the head of his cane. "Now I must be going. This old injury of mine gets upset with me if I sit too long. I will be in town for the next few days if you have any more questions. Although I hope you spend your time looking for the real criminal and not harassing the innocent. These murders sound dreadfully gruesome." With that, Jack and his lawyer went on their way. Later in the evening, Brown decided to pay one last visit to Dr. Winters to return the book. He had no more time to spend reading. The case was going to take all his concentration. It was now imperative, more so than ever, to find the demon, as in Brown's mind, this was no longer a person. 15 minutes later, he found himself at Dr. Winters' residence. He rapped on the door and waited. There was no answer. He knocked on the door again. Minutes passed by, and Brown began to look around for any signs that the doctor was home. He had just descended down the stairs when he heard the door creak as the old man on the inside plied his might to open them. "Doctor, it's Inspector Brown." "Is this about my laboratory again?" the doctor asked. "No, at this point, you are no longer a person of interest." "Oh, was there a turn in the case?" Winters asked, mildly amused. "Sort of. New bodies, unrelated to you. That's as far as I can go at this time." "I understand. Come in, Inspector." Brown entered the house. He noticed that the floors had been cleaned. "It appears as if you have a new maid," the inspector remarked as they made their way down the long hallway to the study. "I did, but at last she did not work out again. I don't understand how these women can even pass the hiring process. I'm going to run out of possibilities before I can even get this place orderly." They entered the study, and the fire was burning bright. It was warm, but not uncomfortable. "I read as far as I could go last night." "This case is going to take all my time, though. Maybe once I solve it, I'll come back." "Did you understand what little you did read?" "I'll be honest, Doctor. I found it of no use in my line of work. There has to be a clear line of right and wrong in what I do. If there was not, then how would we maintain order in the world?" "Yes, I see. It did miss you completely. It's not that there is no right and wrong. It is that we can decide what is right and wrong. It is subjective to our willpower. The strong decide what is good and evil, the lesser must follow it." "That seems dangerous to me. What if, one day, the strong just decide to prey on the weak?" "They won't. It is their job to protect the weak. Even if they did, they would have good reason for it. What you call prey may actually be called culling the herd." "The herd? These are people, not animals. These people are created equal, endowed by a creator with inalienable rights." "I see you believe that nonsense. I was hoping for more from you. As an inspector, with an impressive arrest record, I was hoping you to be able to think in the abstract. Yet, you must have, at least, an orderly brain." Winters began pacing. He was fumbling with something in his pocket. "Yet, maybe, just maybe, if I show you, you may start to understand. Well, now is as good a time as any." He began to walk out of the study. "This way, Inspector," he called from the darkness of the hallway. They stopped at the room next to the study, the one the doctor always kept locked. Winters produced a key from his pocket and handed it to the inspector. "Brown, I do hope you have a sturdy constitution. This is not for the weak." Brown took the key and put it into the lock. There was an audible pop as the door gave way. Inside was only darkness. Brown looked at the doctor. "Go on. You wanted to see it." Brown took out a matchbook and lit one. Inspector, there is a light switch on the left," Winters said. The inspector looked at him, puzzled. "A light switch?" Winters said, exasperatedly. Brown's hand fumbled against the wall for a moment, and then he found it. With a flick of his finger, the whole room lit up. The electric light, though not foreign to him, dazzled his eyes for a moment. There were jars and specimens on various tables. Some were labeled, others were not. Brown blew out the match and walked in dumbstruck. He lowered his head to one jar and saw a pig's head in preservation fluid. Next to it was a metal pan that had wires connected to a battery. A skinned mouse lay flayed on the pan, spread eagle. Other jars had brains in them. One was labeled dog's brain. Another one was labeled abnormal brain. Brown fell back in shock and disgust, only barely catching himself on the table behind him. He regained his composure when he noticed the doctor enter the room, cane in hand, slowly walking towards him. "Just beautiful, isn't it?" The doctor wasn't asking. He was more making a remark. The same as if he was looking at a painting in a museum. To think, this is where you are stored. Look at it. That is someone's thoughts, their feelings, every memory of every happy or sad time they ever had. It's all right there before you. It is an honor to know that I am in there too. Winter strode up along Brown, who was now examining the contents of the jar more closely. "I only take from the ones that aren't using it. I would like to compare the difference between a dolt and a genius, but that would be a waste to take the mind of a man who is using it to better this world. Simply amazing," he said as he peered closer. "It's all right there in front of us, but we hardly have an idea as to how it works. I want to unlock its secrets. It talks to me, you know." "The brain talks to you?" Brown asked, wondering how stranger this might begin to turn. "Not directly. That would be crazy. Figuratively, I have discovered things. I'm making notes. Someday, when the world is ready, I will inform everyone of what I have discovered. For now, they are not ready." "I don't think they will ever be ready. These are inhumane experiments you're conducting. Almost like Frankenstein. Just that when people find out, they won't come after you with torches and pitchforks. It'll be guns and jail time. If you're lucky. You haven't even seen the important ones. I keep those downstairs." Winter pointed towards the back of the room with a smile. He was like a child showing off his most prized possessions. "There are no stairs there," Inspector Brown observed. "Go by the cupboard and wait. I'll be right back." With that, the doctor hobbled off into the other room. The inspector did as he was told. Moments later, the shelf began to move. Dr. Winters came back into the room and motioned for Brown to go down the stairs. The stairwell spiraled down what must have been 20 feet. They were well underground now. There were giant tubes with electrical conductors sending pulses of energy through them. A solid metal table was in the middle of the room. There was a hose for water, and a body covered by sheets appeared to be on the table. On the sides of the dimly lit room, there were hooks and chains on the wall. The smell of iron hung in the air, and Brown could taste it on the tip of his tongue. To the right, there was a phonograph. Brown considered this very odd. There was a quiet, muffled sound that came from the steel table. Brown drew back the cloth. Vomit exploded out of his mouth just as he turned his head to its side. He had seen some gruesome sights in his life, but he was not prepared for this. Underneath the cloth, he saw the face of a woman. Her eyelids had been cut off, and her eyeballs were cracked and bleeding. It took 4 hours for that to happen to her, once I sliced them off. My artificial tear solution did nothing but elicit screams of pain. I need to work on a new formula. Most likely too much salt. I have to get the osmolality right. Why? Brown asked in between episodes of emesis. Tears were welling in his eyes. Why? That's an odd question. It could be answered with, why not? Winter stopped at the end of the stairs and just leaned on his cane. This world is cruel, Mr. Brown. Whether I am cruel or not, it makes no difference. My only hope is that through their suffering, I can change that. Imagine, if you will, that through their moment of pain, I can make the breakthroughs that will alleviate all pain. Maybe even find the proverbial fountain of youth? Do you know how many patients I lost on the operating table? Countless. You think you'll save them with some eye drops? You're not just crazy. You're mad. Brown was still trying to find his feet. His brain was constantly recoiling from the shock, and he continued to end up on the floor. He was like a fish out of water. Perhaps I am. I have been driven insane by an insane world. It would be a logical reaction to an illogical world. Is it sane for a mother to rebuff the affection of her own children? For a father to drink his life away and cause harm to the ones he created? For a hard-working man just trying to feed his family to be driven to the point of suicide by this cold, unloving, unforgiving society? This is insanity that occurs in this world. I am just trying to bring order from the chaos, peace from suffering, peace for all those that deserve it. I get it. You've had a rough go at it. Everyone has. My point exactly, Mr. Brown. Winters began to walk toward a shelf on the wall. You're an inspector. You've seen the atrocities that occur in this world. Children abused, neglected, hurt by the very ones that gave them life, by the very ones that should protect and nurture them. Lift the cover from the specimen's abdomen, if you would. Brown did not want to see any more. He wanted to leave, but his feet would not have done him much good at this point. He had very little choice but to do as he was told. He lifted the sheet, and what was underneath caused another violent explosion of his stomach. The bile burned as it passed over his throat and out of his mouth. The woman's uterus lay on her upper legs, completely removed from her body. I started this research back in Whitechapel. Unfortunately, I was unable to finish before I had to leave. You see, once I perfect the creation of an external womb, there will no longer be a family. No more will parents birth children they do not want. No more will drunkards be able to impregnate idiotic women. The state will handle all births and care for them as no mother or father could. How do you get away with this? Brown was now openly weeping. Ha! That's the easy part. I promise people elixirs and cures, ones that I can deliver. I involve myself in secret societies. You would never had heard of these ones. However, they make the Freemasons look like a book club. People give me money for my knowledge. They keep my secrets for my cures. The doctor reached for a vial and a syringe. This one right here is a special one. I keep it just for myself. He loaded the syringe with a sickly yellow solution and then gave himself an injection. Let me ask you, Mr. Brown, do you want to just live in peace? Or do you want to fight the good fight and help find the cure? What? I want none of this. You deserve to be brought to justice. You're just a disgusting freak. Brown had had enough. Only a quick death would be suitable for this monster. Brown dropped to one knee and drew his service revolver. Bang, 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 bang! The shots were fired in rapid succession. 4 of the 5 shots missed. One struck him dead center in the chest. The doctor staggered back and caught himself on the shelf behind him. It appeared to the inspector as if the last shot had been fatal. It should have been fatal. It had to have been fatal. A moment passed. Brown raised himself up and went to check on the woman. He put his ear to her chest and discovered she was no longer breathing. Slowly he approached Winters. Carefully he took his steps. He put his hand on the doctor's neck. Fingers felt around to find a pulse. Brown's eyes grew wide in shock and terror. He felt a strong, definite heartbeat. The doctor let out a malevolent laugh as he raised to his feet. The doctor's hand swiped a straight razor off of the shelf. A flask fell onto the phonograph and broke on the ground. The music started as the doctor slashed at Mr. Brown's face. This sent the inspector to the ground. Dr. Winters, no! Dear God, no! Did I ever tell you that back in London, they used to call me Jack? The doctor asked before he pounced on the inspector. Brown felt the burning slashes of the razor across his face and neck. His hands flailed furiously at the doctor. Thanks to the injection, the old man now felt as if he had the strength of 100 youths. With one hand, Brown fought back at Winters. The other hand searched in desperation for his pistol. Upon finding it, he cocked the hammer back. Placing the gun to the bottom jaw of Winters, Brown pulled the trigger. Bang! The revolver expelled its last round. The .45 Colt bullet blew a sizable hole in the back of the doctor's skull, one that no amount of potion or concoction could help him recover from. Brown slid in a pool of his own blood and began to pull himself back up the stairs. Long crimson streaks followed him through the upper laboratory and down the dark hallway. His breaths came in gasps, and the coughs were wet. His face and neck looked like a jigsaw puzzle. He reached for the door and began to choke on his own blood. He reached up again, and his fingers fumbled at the latch. His eyes grew heavy as his hand came crashing back down. The blood filled his lungs and burned. He blinked once, and then once more. Then it all faded to black. Thank you for watching.